Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden, and I am very excited about today's guest, who I will tell you about in a moment. It's the end of the month, so after the interview, I'll be sharing some of our listener reaction. We love hearing from you. You can always reach us at contact@femsplainers.com or through our various social media. And joining that segment will be our new intern. Her name is Kai, so stay on and you will meet her. Now about our guest. Over the past couple of episodes, I feel we've been hitting pretty key aspects of our romantic lives. On Valentine's Day, we had our spectacular dating coach, Evan Mark Katz. And last episode, we learned all about boobs. And today, we're going to talk entirely about sex. Joining me will be Dr. Sheva Marcus. She's the author of a new book called Sex Points, Reclaim Your Sex Life with the Revolutionary Multi-Point System. She is the founder and clinical director of New York's Mays Women's Sexual Health, the largest independent sexual health center in the country. She's also nicknamed the Queen of Vibrators. What I really love about her book is it will completely transform not only your sex life, but what you think of your sex life and what you think of your sex life, especially as a woman. She wrote in the opening of her book, she said, if you've been told it's natural to lose your sex drive as you get older, or all you need is a glass of wine to relax, or it's all in your head, I want you to know your problems are fixable. If you're in pain or are ashamed of your fantasies or are thinking about sex should be good because you're young and in love, you shouldn't be. No matter who you are, I want you to know that you can have good sex. And she says that's true if you're 80. And it's also true for women who have had histories of sexual abuse or trauma. She believes they can also have full and fulfilling sex lives. So warning, you may want to listen to this episode with your earbuds on or the volume turned way down, especially if there are little ears about. And to our male listeners, even though our primary focus will be on women, you may find this information helpful as well, if only to find the answer to the eternal question, what do women want? Or maybe just, what does your woman want? As a reminder, if you're enjoying this podcast, please consider becoming what I call a friend with benefits. Your subscriptions and memberships keep the podcast going. You can go to patreon.com/femsplainers, and for as little as $1 or $2 or $5 a month, you'll receive our special monthly bonus episode called Last Call. You'll receive our newsletter, and you'll get a chance to ask our guest questions. So could have asked Dr. Marcus some of your sex questions if you were a member. Plus, you'll be invited to our monthly cocktail party. So again, patreon.com/femsplainers. And now, after a quick ad, I will bring on Dr. Marcus. Prescription acne treatment really works, but it's hard to get. You have to take time off work to see a doctor and sit in line at the pharmacy for your medications until Apostrophe. Apostrophe makes it easy to see a board-certified dermatologist online. You'll get treated immediately and your medications are delivered right to your home. Simply fill out Apostrophe's online questionnaire, you know I love questionnaires, about your skin concerns and medical history. Then just snap a few selfies and your dermatologist will get back to you with a customized treatment plan tailored just for you. And the best part is that Apostrophe offers topical and oral medications, so you can treat your acne from the inside out and the outside in. And in addition to acne, Apostrophe can also help you hit your other skin care goals, like reducing redness, wrinkles, and even dark spots. What I love about Apostrophe is being able to connect right away online with a real dermatologist. I don't have to schedule an appointment or even leave my house. And now our listeners can get $15 off your first visit with a board-certified dermatologist at apostrophe.com/femsplainers and use our code, FEMSPLAINERS. This code is only available to our listeners. So to get started, just go to Apostrophe, that's APOSTROPHE, apostrophe.com/femsplainers and click Begin Visit. Then use the code FEMSPLAINERS at sign up and you'll get $15 off your first dermatology visit. That's apostrophe.com/femsplainers and use that code FEMSPLAINERS to get your dermatology visit for $15 off. And we thank Apostrophe for sponsoring the podcast. Batsheva, welcome to the Femsplainers.
I am so excited to be here. You have no idea. Very excited. Well, I wish I was with you in DC in a real studio, but whatever.
Yeah, well, one day. Now, I was just knocked out by your book. I'd not read such a, I want to say clinical book, but in the best way, that a book that is both full of health information, but such incredible insight into women and their, not just their sexual functions, but their romantic lives and their sex lives. And I just want to give this book to every woman I know. So I'm just thrilled to have you here, and there's so much that's in it, but we'll get to the heart of it. And
I cannot tell you how happy, I cannot tell you how happy this made me, because you put a book out into the world and it's scary. I mean, I don't know if you've done that yet. I'm sure you will if you haven't already.
I've done it. I've given
Many
birth
times.
That way a few times.
Yes, exactly. So I'm sorry, I haven't read them. Now I got to go order them all. And part of what worried me was that it has a very sort of girlfriend across the table feel, but there's a lot of really complex information there. And I tried so hard to make it sort of accessible. And so it means so much to me to hear you say that. That's all.
Yeah, it was very accessible and made a lot of sense. I think what I liked, it was right at the beginning of the book, but this kind of summarized your philosophy. You said to someone, there's never a happily ever after, only a happily ever after for a while. Meaning that this idea that sex is always the same at every age, or should be this romantic image that we have of it is just not true. And just having that mindset can lead to a lot of unhappiness.
So I think that's part of one of the biggest issues there's a couple of big issues, but one big issue is that we have such a either heavily romanticized or fantasy view of what a sex life should look like. And that starts with women feeling like they kind of learn to have sex, either well or badly, who knows? And then however their sex life kind of lands, that's their sex life for the rest of their life. And nothing could be further from the truth. That's almost and I probably put this analogy in the book, I don't even remember anymore. If somebody handed you a dress, at age 18 and said, okay, this is going to be the dress you're going to wear for your whole life, right? You're not going to gain weight, lose weight, grow, shrink, the elbows aren't going to fray, your chain styles are going to change. It's just ridiculous to assume that our sex life is going to stay static for our whole life. And people have that. And so then when something goes wrong, they're like, oh my God, that's it, that's the end. But that's not how it works. Our sex life changes. It changes due to our relationships. It changes due to our age. It changes due to our lifestyle, our family situation. It changes due to our profile, our hormonal profile changing. Changes due to the length of our relationship. So the more that women can move through their sex life, and men for that matter, but this book's for women, with the understanding that there's always going to be changes, always going to be difference. You're going to hit road bumps. That's just the part of life. And that every road bump really can be addressed, the better I think we all will all then your sex life can really weather your life. It can be there for you for your whole life in a really positive, good way until you're 85. And I'm only saying 85 because that's the oldest patient I ever had, maybe 95, So I think that is wrapping our minds around the fact that, things aren't working for us today. And that's perfectly normal. We just need to acknowledge it and figure out how to make it work for us.
Well, it's especially true with women, and not to suggest that men don't have issues, similar issues of whether it's low desire or whatever, but they're a little more mechanical. It's either on or it's off. Whereas when a woman is having issues with her sex drive, it's so complex. And what science and doctors have said to women is, well, maybe you just need to relax, or you should have a glass of wine, or women prefer cuddling or something. And I think it also drives the male partner crazy too, because he feels like he's always doing something wrong. But what you brought is not only tremendous psychological insight, and you've treated thousands of women, but also as you say, hormonal profiles, that just your estrogen being off can have a huge effect.
right? Your testosterone being off. We don't think of women as needing testosterone. We're realizing how critical testosterone is. And, the analogy I often, or the story, the story that sort of opens people's eyes a little bit is, if you're standing in a movie theater line and, well, pre-COVID, if we were standing in a movie theater line and you saw two 17-year-olds who couldn't keep their hands off each other, your reaction would not be, oh my God, they must have had this deep, meaningful conversation just now. Or, oh, he must have sent her beautiful flowers, right?
She must have just had a bubble bath.
Exactly. He must have given her an hour off from her life, No, you'd be like, their hormones are raging, right? Like, we're very conscious of how important that is. But yet, when we hit our 30s or 40s or 50s, to suggest that, oh, maybe what's going on is hormonal, everybody's like, oh, cannot be. It must be the relationship. And that ends up sending us down these crazy rabbit holes of looking for problems in relationships that may be perfectly fine. Every relationship's not perfect, but, so that's where that whole 100-point model came from. Like, let's stop looking at this. Let's stop looking at this as a binary, what's broken, let's fix it. The one broken thing that's off and let's turn it on. Let's look at this from a much more holistic perspective. Like, you need 100 points to be having good sex. And let's see where those points are missing. That's the questionnaire at the beginning. And now let's see where to get them back. Because I really, really believe every woman can get back enough points to have that 100 points or else doesn't have a good sex life. Yeah, I do want to throw in that I think you're a little underselling men, Danielle. I feel like men have it a little more complicated too. And I feel like we tend to say, they have it easy. It's a little more complicated for them too. I need to throw in a little bit.
No, I understand, but it is true that, put it this way, his problem is more physically evident than a woman.
No, for sure. He can't get away with it when he's on it. Right.
Exactly.
Totally. That's 100%. But that's another issue in its own right. So right. I have a whole chapter in the book called Men Are From Mars. Maybe it's time to start exploring Mars. Yes.
I enjoy that. Well, okay. So your book is called Sex Points, and you mentioned this 100-point model, and you developed this model, as you say, to when women come into your clinic and they're expressing problems that you start tallying up their points, as it were. Take us through your point system. There's like 4 major areas.
Right. So what I do, when I do it with a patient or a client in my practice, it's not quite as cleanly cut as it is in the book, right? Like the book is like a lot. The book is a blueprint, but you'll get some sense. What I'm trying to ascertain when I talk to women, and what the quiz at the beginning of the book does, is, can we pinpoint where the most points are missing or where the ultimate problem may be, right? In other words, you're having problems in lots of different areas. It's very hard for women to identify what it is that's wrong. So for a woman who's having pain, it may be easier to identify, the pain is what's the problem, but it's also not so clear, because sometimes women will say, I have low desire because I have pain, right? But then what I realize is, well, actually, she has low desire that's independent of the pain, or the pain started because of the low desire, because she doesn't have sex very often, and now her vagina is not elastic the way it needs to be. So so basically, I feel like patients are kind of coming in and sort of, let's think of a plate of spaghetti. They dump this whole plate of spaghetti on my desk, on my plate, and I'm slowly trying to pull out the strands to figure out where the biggest issues are, what created problems in what other areas, and where the points are missing, essentially. So the book focuses, and how I approach all my patients is with 4 quadrants, which, to be fair, is where you started and what you asked. And I went on this little whole rant.
Okay. No, you're explaining it. Thank you.
So the 4 quadrants are problems with desire. They don't really want to have sex. And people are always mixing that up with arousal, problems with arousal, which is, I want to have sex, but I don't get turned on. So those need to be separated, because those need to be addressed separately, right? So I don't want to have sex means I really don't want to have sex. Even though we had sex last week and it was great and I had a great orgasm, I still don't want to have sex. What the hell is wrong with me? So that's a desire problem. Arousal is, well, I would want to have sex. It's just that the sex itself is terrible. I can't get turned on. My body doesn't seem to get lubricated. I don't get that tingly feeling. I can't get the laundry list stop running in my head, right? That's an arousal problem. Orgasms, we are all very well familiar with what orgasm problems are. Either I can't have them, or I used to have them, or lots and lots of women, as they hit post children, early perimenopause, will be like, they're not the same. It takes me forever. It's not worth the work. I'm telling you, it's possible to get your orgasms back. Don't listen to anybody who says otherwise. And then the last area is pain, which I think we are all too familiar with. Like, it gets ignored. Doctors look and say, I don't see anything the matter. And so we go home feeling worse. So those are the four quadrants: low desire, problems with arousal, problems with orgasm, and pain. And they all play off each other. And so what you want to do is get a profile of your, point profile on each of these, but I also explain how each of these then affects the other quadrants. So at the end of part one of this book, you should have a really kind of nice roadmap of where your points are, how they're affecting other parts of your, of your sex life, and where you might want to get started. And then we can move on to part two, which is all the solutions, the medical and what you call psychological and what you call behavioral. And yeah.
One of the things I think that you hit on several times is boredom in a sexual relationship. And I think this is what you described, that young couple at the beginning, not keeping their hands off each other. And then, the inevitable, whether you're young and you're in a relationship for a year or two, or God forbid, you're married for over 30 years, and it's all got to die, right? It's just got to become boring. It's going to become routine, and there's really nothing you can do about that.
Right. So I think there's so many ways to unpack it, and that's what I really try to do in this book, and try to unpack it in a way that makes people feel normal and like this is not a new problem, and that there are solutions to it that do not involve having an affair. Which, if somebody chooses to do that, that's, I'm not judgmental of that, or opening the relationship. I just think that there should be options for those of us who want to stay in monogamous long-term relationships. So let me give you one, I'll give you one sort of really interesting tidbit, which I'm not actually even sure I talk about in the book, but we always have this fantasy that monogamy is way easier for women than it is for men. Right? Like that is.
Yes, you mentioned that. Yes.
I do. Right. It's a cultural norm. Like, of course, women are fine with monogamy. It's men who have the problem with monogamy. And here's my take on this, which I just think, Danielle, it's fascinating to me. The new data coming out seems to suggest that women have a harder time with monogamy than men do. But what I think happens culturally is that men are allowed to whine about it, right? Men are allowed to whine about it, make jokes about it, complain about it, and then they're perfectly happy having sex with the same partner for the rest of their life. They fantasize a little bit, maybe watch a little bit of porn, things go up, things go down, but they're really pretty okay with having sex with the same person. Women, on the other hand, feel so guilty about the fact that they are not necessarily attracted to this guy, and they're fantasizing about, the fireman down the block. I don't know what it is with firemen. Firemen seem to hold sway on many women's fantasies.
They can carry you out of a burning building. So
totally, yeah. There's like the manly piece here. It's like Bridgerton. Have you watched Bridgerton?
Not yet, no.
Okay, you should watch Bridgerton.
Yeah,
then we should get back on to talk about it. Okay, total eye candy in every way. Anyway, so women have a hard time with it, and then they start feeling like, oh, I'm not really interested in my husband. Oh my God. And I think they just shut down rather than, relying on some of the things the men have always used, which is flirting with other people, fantasizing about other people, because they feel so guilty about it. Like they feel like there's something wrong with them. And so they shut down. And then we get this social norm, or sort of the wisdom that says, oh, because women just aren't interested in sex as much as men are. Well, no, I don't actually think that's true. I think that just women aren't necessarily as interested in sex with the same man their whole life, and they're just not willing to own that in the way that the men do. And then so they just shut down. And so then we end up having this fantasy that women are just less sexual beings than men. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I was fascinated. You quoted a study by two neuroscientists that was done in 2011.
Oh, I did. Mm-hmm.
Based on not what women say they want, but what they actually search for online.
Right, people. That whole book. It was called A Billion Wicked Thoughts. Excellent book. Yes.
And so reveal to what it is that women are looking for when they search online.
So right. So what was so brilliant about that book, and I highly recommend people buy it after they buy mine. It's called A Billion Wicked Thoughts. And what they did is they said, people notoriously lie when you do sexual surveys. They lie to the person doing the questionnaire, but they lie to themselves too. Is the truth. So rather than relying on people's reporting of what they want, they were going to look at Google searches. And they could tell basically, and this was like before people were a little bit more careful about data. So because this was done, 10 years ago. But you can tell by searches who the 17-year-old boys are, who the 30-year-old women are, right? You can tell that stuff. And then you can see what they're searching for sexually. So they were really stunned. This is not, I'm sort of going circuitous route to answer your question there. But so they were stunned by, like, for example, a lot of men are not looking for skinny young women, just for the record. So I'm going to leave it at that. You can take a look at the data there and say, the men are looking for lots of ages other than that 18 to 21 that we're thinking of. Let's start with that.
Really?
And yes.
Does podcast host come up in any of the searches?
It was not the number one search was sexy, hot mama, middle-aged podcast host.
Yeah. Okay, exactly. Good to know.
Exactly, good. You have a whole other career there. Just so you know. So women, and the issue has always been women with porn. Like somehow women don't go onto porn lines the same way men do, but what women do spend just as much time, if not more than men with their searches, are erotic stories, okay? And they liked the stories, and I don't think this is gonna surprise any woman listening to this, they like the stories about the alpha males. Like, let's look at 50 Shades of Grey, right? Mm-hmm. That was a fun book. It's like Bridgerton, right? It was terrible. I mean, I couldn't believe it when my patients would come in and go, oh my God, I love that book. I'm like, there's so much better erotic literature out there, guys. But people loved that book. And they loved that book because it kind of hit every note in terms of the strong, take charge, alpha male. There was the BDSM element, which we could spend a lot of time talking about. And I think that is just to suggest the BDSM piece of the bondage piece of it is just to narrow it too much. Really, I think women are really attracted to this alpha male type, and we don't want to admit it to ourselves, especially in these modern days when it's not PC. And I think that becomes a problem because it becomes an inner sort of turmoil between the part of you that's like, how many patients do I have who say to me, the best sex I ever had was with Johnny, who's covered with tattoos and in jail. He was a motorcycle dude, and he's probably in jail now. And he was the hottest sex I ever had, as opposed to my lovely, sweet man I am currently married to. So my issue is own that. We have to own that. And when you own it, you can do something about it. When you're too busy denying that and saying, oh, women are just not sexual beings, women really want men who do the dishes. And I do think we want men to do the dishes, just being clear. But
yeah, let's be, and don't miss the crumbs. Don't miss the crumbs.
Yeah, no, yes, exactly. Don't miss the crumbs and wipe out that handy wipe. Straight out that handy wipe. So no, we want those things, but sexually, often there are other things that we want, and trying to figure out how to get all that from one person is a challenge. Monogamy is a challenge, but I think it's one that we can do if you have a little bit of know-how and you're willing to work at it.
Well, I was very inspired by, I think it was your 85-year-old client that you spoke about. And then there was a woman in her 70s.
Vibrator? The woman, the 85-year-old?
Yep.
82. Yeah, she was a bird watcher. She was like one of my favorite clients. And she was having trouble having orgasms. And so I introduced her to vibrators, which I just think are one of the most underused tool in women's sexual arsenal. And I did my PhD thesis on vibrators. Did you know that?
Yes, I was going to bring that up, but yes, I'm glad you did.
Anyway. So I introduced her vibrators. It changed her life because already at 85, her blood flow wasn't quite as good. Her hormone profile was lowish. She was having great orgasms. I don't know if I said this in the book, but this was a great story. She came in one day and she said, Batsheva, she said, my husband was getting they were in Italy and he was making his film of Italy. They were retired and he was all obsessed with his film from Italy. And I guess he wasn't paying enough attention to her. And so she took her vibrator and she plugged it in. It was a plug-in vibrator. Now they're making them all chargeable. This was a few years ago. And she left it on the pillow as a hint for him, so that when he came in, he saw the vibrator, he was laughing, and I just love that. I just love that. But you have to realize that is classic. That sort of takes us full circle, right? Like to know that you're 85, you still want to have a great sex life with your husband. And that may mean a vibrator. And that's true about a 45-year-old too. When you're having sex, that's great. It just means that things are different and you just embrace the newness.
Well, you had what you called a realistic approach to long-term sex or a long-term sex life. And I'll just, if you want to just say a couple things about, I've written down your suggestions that will help women. As you say, you're never going to have the same hormones as when you were 18 or 22, but that's no reason that the sex has to be any less interesting.
Correct. We can help you with the hormones, by the way. I just want to say.
I was going to get to that as well, because the whole physical side of that is fascinating. But just like things we can do. The first one you said was scheduling. Now this sounds so unromantic. You said you should schedule sex. Explain.
Okay, so this is hysterical because this is not even just so new to me. I mean, a lot of sex therapists talk about scheduling sex. I would say most of them do. So for you to think that you're in a relationship for 20 years or 30 years, or even 3 years or 4 years, and this sudden spontaneous urge to have sex is going to pixie dust all over you is so unrealistic. I cannot even begin to tell you. And couples who have long-term sex lives that are working are all scheduling it. And whether or not they know it is the question. So for example, I'll sit down with somebody who has a good sex life and I'll say, we don't schedule sex. Oh, really? So when do you have sex? I'll say, and she'll say, oh, well, usually on the weekends. We usually have sex at least once on the weekend. Or she'll say, well, usually we have sex on the weekends, or and then once on Wednesday, or sometime during the week, or we usually don't let more than 3 or 4 days go by without having sex. That is scheduling sex. It's just that it's sort of a natural progression of scheduling sex. So the idea that sex becomes something that is part of your life. I just want you to know, for years and years, I resisted using exercise as an analogy for sex, because I thought oh my God, people are going to say oh, that is the worst. She's making it sound like it's deadly, like exercise. And then I was like, screw it, because the truth is that's a perfect analogy, because you know how we feel? You feel great when you move. I don't want to say exercise. I want to say move. When you get off the sofa and you move and you have it as a regular part of your life, you love it. You look forward to it. It's like a part of your life that makes you feel good, that makes your life more alive. But it's something you kind of have to push yourself to do. And usually it's something that you have to schedule in some way. Either I do it in the mornings, I go to a class. And sex is exactly like that too. If you want to have a regular ongoing sex life, you need to schedule it in. And if you're not having a sex life right now, then in the beginning, that has to be done a little bit more, sort of, I don't know how you clinically, right? That means pulling out your calendar with your partner and saying, listen, I want to have sex. I want to make sure we're having sex. Could we talk about when works for us? And that sounds, that sounds unromantic, but what's really unromantic? Or what's really not sexy? Not having sex. That's really not sexy. So,
well, I like what you said too in the scheduling, the flip side of it. I was thinking especially of women with young children and, crawling into bed at the end of the day, as you say, with laundry lists going through their heads. And then, the husband, the father sort of start to, knock on the door, as it were, try the lock. And the poor mother just is like, oh my God, I can't.
Get the hell off of me.
Yeah. I can't take any more human contact right now. But when you schedule it, if you're in that type of situation, it's something you can look forward to. It's something you can plan for. He might even think, you know what, I'm going to take the kids out this afternoon. And then the days that it's not on. So you're also, I think you talked about women's guilt of needing to say no or having to say no and then feeling bad about it.
So Danielle, I just want to separate out two things. So I think it's really important. I have two sections in the book. One where I talk about generally scheduling sex, which I think every single couple in a long-term relationship has to do, period. If it's not scheduled, if you want to have a sex life, you have to think about it. That's what it, maybe scheduling, you want to say scheduling, you have to think about it. You have to think and plan if you want to have sex, period. What you're referring to is a section of the book that I called Scheduling Not Sex. And I think that is so powerful. And it's probably one of my most powerful tools when a woman comes in who's feeling like I have no desire, she's crying. my marriage is falling apart. He wants to have sex. He feels so rejected. I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't seem to get my act together to do it like that. And in those cases, what I will do is say, is there an amount of sex you can have with a really positive attitude? Is that once a week? Is that once every other week? You need to sit down with your partner and talk about it. And let's say it's once a week. So you both of you know that Sunday night you will have sex, and the rest of the week sex is off the table. Exactly like what you just said, Danielle. Because it takes away that clock that runs in women's heads. Like, oh my God, it's been one night since we had sex. I just had sex. Thank God I don't have to think about it again. Oh my God, it's been a week. Now he's thinking about it. I'm going to stay on the computer for 20 minutes, make sure he falls asleep. Oh my God, it's been 10 days. He must be like, every time he comes over to kiss me, I stiffen up. I don't want to touch him. And then the men complain legitimately. Forget the sex. She won't even kiss me anymore. And I'm like, well, she won't kiss you anymore because every time she kisses you, you think, and I get it, oh my God, she's softening up. Maybe she'll have sex with me tonight, right? So they get into this like dance where she's pulling further and further apart. He's feeling more and more dejected. He's like trying to be nicer and doing more dishes. And, it's like, and she's just getting more and more pressured. And it's just a terrible dynamic. And when you say, listen, guys, we're going to have sex Sunday night. We're going to have sex. And I, the woman, let's assume it's the woman with the low desire, although I have had the reverse. I'm going to do it with a positive attitude. You're not going to have to whine me and dine me and, walk around, like tiptoeing, making sure that it's going to happen. Sunday nights, we're going to have sex, and I'm going to do it with positive attitude. And the rest of the week, we're not going to have sex. And I can climb naked to bed with you and put my arms around you and snuggle your neck and connect to you in really intimate ways without feeling like you're necessarily going to assume we're going to have sex. And that I cannot tell you the pressure that takes off. I can't even begin to tell you it's like an escape valve. I don't know, pressure cookers, when you see that, like the hiss come out of the pressure cooker, like that is the feeling. Like all of a sudden, she'll often say, like, I can have sex once a week. I'm happy to have sex once a week. Or I'm not yet happy to have sex once a week, but I'm okay having sex once a week. But I just don't want to feel the pressure the rest of the week. And he's like, oh my God, I have a loving partner back again who's not avoiding me. And to be fair, he's also feeling like, okay, we'll have sex on Sunday. So that's okay. I can manage it's that feeling of his that I'm never, ever going to have sex again. And I don't never know when she's in the mood or not in the mood. And she's mad at me for kissing her or not kissing her. So all of that dissipates. And that's honestly, I feel like it's one of the tools that I wish more sex therapists use, and they don't use it. And I don't know if they get it exactly, but I feel like it's one of the most helpful things that I do. So I have now given you my secret. You can now become a sex therapist.
That's right. Well, no, because there are some more things. So more realistic approaches to a long-term sex life. I can kind of group these next three together. You talk about fantasies, faking adultery, and learning to see your partner in different contexts. And you suggest like going to his office and having lunch, and then you get to see him, he's in an old-fashioned office, he's in a suit, or you get to see him as others see him, as you once saw him, not as the person you're so familiar with around the house. So it's learning to see both your partner in a way that is as a sexual partner and also in a fantasy way too. So do you want to talk about those?
Yes, I'm going to separate out the first thing you said, which is the fantasy, and the other one, which is learning to see your partner in a different way or having an affair with your partner, right? Okay. Right. So let's start with the learning to see your partner another way, because I think that's in some way the most difficult, but also I think so critical. Part of what we need to do psychologically to feel safe in a relationship is to feel like we know our partners really, really well. So we almost convince ourselves that, we know everything about this person, which you and I know is just not true. Like you could not, if that were true, then I wouldn't have women in my table saying to me, he had an affair. He would have been the last person I would have thought to have an affair. Like we never know our partners 100%. We think we know our partners. So, but in order to keep the erotic part of your brain going, you need to be able to see that there's pieces of this man or woman or whoever you're with that you do not know, that you can never 100% know, because you want to have sex with you don't want to have sex with your pajama buddy. Like that is just not how our erotic brains usually work. So I think there's two elements to that. One of them is, as I said to you, try to see if you can get to him outside of the environment where you see each other every day. In COVID, this is particularly difficult.
Yes.
But if your partner is in a job that you can see how his people who work with him see him, it just puts you in a completely different situation, right? Like all of a sudden, you are now seeing this person not as, the schlepper who comes in and dumps the shoes by the door, which, or leaves the crumbs by the kitchen sink, as you pointed out, right? Like you're seeing this person in a different kind of way. And if you allow yourself to do that, it really, I have heard from so many women, it really makes a difference. Like I have a patient her husband is a dentist of all things. And she was like, I sounded crazy, but the truth is I went to his office, people really respect him. Like he's a really good dentist. You know what I mean? Like, so then she started having oh my God, like fantasies about being ravished by the dentist in the dentist chair, which would not be where I would go personally, but that just goes to show how far you can do.
Oral fantasies, really.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So that's where I talk about, sort of seeing your partner the way. And the other piece of that, which is a variation, is allowing your partner to be who he is. Like, I feel like, especially in our very PC culture, we've sort of scrubbed the men. And this goes back to what I said about the biker guy who's in jail. We scrubbed our men of a lot of their sort of stronger emotions, which a lot of women find to be a big turn on. And yet we want men who are supportive and loving and caring. And those things are really, really important. But there's also the other part of them that they should be allowed to own as well, which is the more aggressive part if they have that. And I think we need to be a little bit more accepting of that. So that was sort of about how to see your partner in a different way, which is, it's tricky and it's complicated. What is a lot less tricky and a lot less complicated, I think, is the whole fantasy piece, which I feel like I don't know what has happened in the 21st century, but 21st century, that's what we're in, right? But somehow we have lost our ability to fantasize. We women, I don't know what the hell that's about, but we have given up our fantasy life. And your fantasy life will take you through your whole adult life. The more you can learn to use your fantasies, the better your sex life will be, and the happier you will be. But we've learned to edit them. We're the same as I'm talking about, our partner's stronger emotions. Somehow we decide what fantasies are relevant or what fantasies are PC. I can't tell you how many women will say, oh my God, I have fantasies about a woman. Does that make me a lesbian? And I'm like, first of all, who cares? And second of all, no, it just means that's where your brain wants to go. So whereas you're making a choice to be in a relationship for your whole life, and that will be with one person, but that doesn't mean your brain can't go to the fireman down the block or to the guy at Bridgerton, which is what I'm getting all these direct messages on Instagram about.
I see where your fantasies are going, Dr. Marcus.
It's true. It's totally true. But the truth is, Bridgerton is sort of not my thing. The jewelry and the clothes and the flowers are unbelievable. But the number of messages I've gotten from women about it is just the same thing as what was the other one I was mentioning? 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's great. The more you can use the fantasy part of your brain and realize it's just a fantasy, the better.
So you're saying the women that you meet in your clinic have A, just problems fantasizing, and B, when they do, I think I read that when women do watch porn, one of the most search subjects for a woman is rape. So they do have these fantasies of dominance. And then that's, as you say, to a woke woman, that is extremely embarrassing scary. And,
scary.
Right.
And scary. But that goes back to what I was saying before, which is, so I need to say this. I need anybody listening to me, I need you to hear this. I need you to hear this really clearly. If you're fantasizing about being overtaken by somebody, okay, somebody climbs in your window and overtakes you, you have created the person or people. You have given them exactly the lines you want them to say to you. You have given them the access to the window and the doorway to your room. You have told them how to talk to you and what to look like, and you're telling them exactly when to stop. So you are fine with those fantasies. That does not mean that in real life, you want somebody climbing in the window and overtaking you. Do you know what I mean? Where have we lost this Where in our society have we lost this ability to separate between fantasy and reality?
I don't think I've ever discussed this on the podcast, but for many years now, I've been sourcing all my meat from local farms and farmers markets. And that's not just because I care about how humanely the animals my family consumes are treated. I care a lot about that. But when food is well raised, it just tastes better. That's true of vegetables. Think fresh summer tomato versus one of those red, waxy, tasteless balls you get at the supermarket this time of year. It's also true of meat. So I'm thrilled to have Moinkbox as a sponsor of the podcast. Moinkbox, yes, that seems to be a combo of moo and oink, Moinkbox, delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and wild-caught Alaskan salmon direct to your door, helping family farms become financially independent outside of big agriculture. Their animals are raised outdoors, their fish swim wild in the ocean, and Moink meat is free of antibiotics, hormones, sugar, and all the other junk you find in prepackaged meat in the meat aisle. So sign up at moinkbox.com/femsplainers to get a year of ground beef for free, and then pick what meats you want delivered with your first box. Change what you get each month and cancel anytime. And Moink just doesn't offer butcher cut meats. They have incredible bratwurst sandwiches, and that ground beef they send you makes the juiciest hamburgers. Moink was founded by an 8th-generation farmer who was featured on Shark Tank. Host Kevin O'Leary said it's the best bacon he's ever tasted. And I agree. And Jamie Siminoff, creator of the Ring video doorbell, invested in Moink. They'll guarantee you'll say, "Oink, oink, I'm just so happy I got moinked." So again, you can go to Moink, that's MOINK box, one word, moinkbox.com/femsplainers to get a year of ground beef for free. I know you'll enjoy it as much as I do. No, I mean, I think it is this embarrassment, as you say, and this fear that the fantasy is in fact you, versus just letting it be a fantasy. So I think having a doctor and clinician tell them it's okay, I think that's important. And it goes to what you were also implying, that one of the other aspects of approaching your long-term sex life is to retrain your erotic brain, that you can retrain your brain. It is it's a constantly evolving organ. It's not static. Talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, we used to think of the brain as something that was like a machine, and that you had a certain amount of neurons, and they just died as you got older, which to some degree is true as somebody whose memory is not what it used to be. But what we also have learned and discovered is that when you use pieces of your brain or parts of your brain, you're actually making that part grow. So there's a sense of the chapter is called neuroplasticity, right? Like understanding how the neurons in your brain fire, and how when you use them, they start firing more and they start growing more neurons and more connectors, and there's more blood flow in the area. So for example, if you did math problems, like let's say you did geometry problems, you would get better at those geometry problems, but you get better at that way of thinking all around. It wouldn't be just those particular problems that you'd be getting better at. Like that part of your brain would start getting used and start basically flourishing. Parts of your brain that you don't use sort of get pruned away. Those neurotransmitters just start stop firing because you don't need them anymore. It's very efficient if you're not using them. We have erotic parts of our brain, and the more you use them, the easier it will be to use them, the easier it will be to access them. So again, under the heading of fantasies that we all have, the other kind of fantasy, not this kind of fantasy, we think that fantasies should just come supernaturally, like that somehow I shouldn't have to learn how to fantasize about Sheva, right? Like fantasizing is just something little kids know how to do. Little kids know how to do it. And then we stop using it as we get older, and our brain gets used to not doing it, and it's not good for us. So one of the things I will work with women on is let's get your fantasies back. Let's get that part of your brain functioning again. And in the beginning, it may feel a little uncomfortable. It may feel like a lot of work, but I promise you, if you start moving that part of your brain again and you get those neurotransmitters firing, you can get back your fantasy life. And your fantasy life is so important. It's so important in a long-term relationship. Forget that. It's important even if you're not in a relationship. It's just important to keep your sexual self alive.
Yeah, and part of that, and then bringing the fantasy, as you say, not that you really want someone to come through the window, but to bring some of that fantasy into your actual sex. Like you talked about talking with your partner, experimenting, even if you feel silly, that you should be more open about trying new things.
Right. So I always say there's two kinds of fantasies. There's a kind of fantasy which you just want to live with on your own, and either because it's not practical, because you're fantasizing about, having sex with, I don't know, somebody on Mars, and that's not going to happen, or because you're fantasizing about like 15 people and you actually don't really want that to happen. And then there's the kind of fantasies where you feel like, oh, this would be fun to sort of try out with my partner, be that like dressing up as Princess Leia, or, or I think I'm dating myself.
Buns would be tricky, I think.
Those buns would be really tricky. I think they sell them. And wait, and you, now I lost the thread, but basically you were saying,
trying these, yes, trying these things.
Trying these things so if you have fantasies that you think might be fun to try out, I cannot tell you the number of women who say to me, I would feel so uncomfortable asking my partner to tie me up or to tie him up. I would just be I can't even imagine doing that. And we've been married for 20 years. How the hell am I going to do that much of a? And I'm like, listen, when you're uncomfortable, you're on the right track. Like, let's just be honest here. Early on, when our sex lives were on fire, we were all nervous and uncomfortable initially, right? That was it. That was part of what made it so hot. It was like, you weren't sure how the person would react. You kind of felt like a little giddy and uncomfortable, and that really made it fun. And then we get super comfortable with our partners and we expect it to stay super comfortable. And honestly, that's just like less erotic and less hot. And so if something makes you uncomfortable, I'm going to say to you, go for it. I get it. It's going to be, say to your partner, I want to try having sex sitting on a chair. Like, worst that'll happen is you'll both end up laughing and it won't work well. Or I want to try having sex in the shower, or meet your partner at the door, assuming you don't have little kids, with nothing but a coat on, nothing on under your coat, right? Like, think about what thing seems like a fun thing to try. And yes, if your thought is, oh my God, there's no way in hell I could pull this off, I am going to tell you, that is where you need to go. That is where you need to go, because that is what makes your sex life have that tinge of fun, erotic charge that you maybe feel like you're missing.
All right, let's go to now the physical side of it, and sort of the hormones and health. I mean, we talked a little bit at the beginning about the importance of hormones to our sex drive, and that can be true to a young woman who is on birth control, that method could be throwing her hormones out of whack, to women who are postmenopausal. And one of the myths I was fascinated by, and this affected me as well, the myth that surrounds using hormones and hormone replacement therapy, that it's almost taboo. I remember going to my doctor when I was 50, and, TMI, I had to have a hysterectomy. And so I was just, my whole body was thrown into chaos.
I have to tell you, I thought you were younger than 50. Oh, okay. No, I'm serious. I'm not just saying that. I'm looking at you and saying, I thought
well, maybe it's because of the hormone. Because after that, I went to my doctor, my then doctor, and I asked, I mean, you just immediately thrown shockingly into menopause. And so she prescribed the most minimum estrogen. It sort of asked me, why would I want it? Said, oh, okay, to offset, menopause. And then she said, but we're going to try get you off it as quickly as possible. And then I started reading about it. And the more I read, I thought, this is insane. And then I went to an endocrinologist who prescribed me both estrogen and testosterone because you need it. And there was no real credible medical, it was based on a flawed study that you cite 20 years ago, that if we gave women estrogen, they could get different types of cancers. And then that was not shown to be true. So, but yet even, it still persists out there that especially if you're menopausal, use as little as you can and get off it as quickly as you can.
So Danielle, I wish I could reach across the screen and give you a hug. I know, because if I was talking to somebody who who had read all the bunk about estrogen, there's just no way for me to debunk this in like 30 seconds. So if anybody wants more information about estrogen, I do talk about it in my book, but it's one very small piece of the book. There's a wonderful book on there called Estrogen Matters. I think it's the best book out there. I feel like it's extremely balanced and really medically backed. So if you're interested in that whole estrogen debate, yes. And I feel just like you do, like old science, bad science, poorly designed studies, all kinds of other pharmacological, like secondary, underlying concerns that were pushing men to make decisions about women in a really not helpful way. I think estrogen is incredibly valuable for women, for your hair, for your skin, for your bones, for your brain. There are women who can't be on it for a variety of reasons. You need to speak to your doctor about it. I am not doing any medical advice here, but I am saying it is worth understanding and exploring estrogen because it has a dramatic impact on your sex life. Your vagina is incredibly hormonally mediated. And if you take away estrogen from your vagina is not going to be happy. And that's what happens after you have children and as you're in perimenopause. And in the book, I do a lot of explaining about the difference between local estrogen you just use in your vagina, and systemic estrogen, which is all through you. And you need to be an educated consumer. That's what I feel like for women. And that is what I want from this book. I want you to understand the issues so that you can talk intelligently to your doctor about what it is you think you want. So estrogen is really important. And the fact that your doctor gave you testosterone is like a miracle because I just want to tell you, like, so many doctors still haven't gotten the memo on testosterone. And years and years ago when we started, everybody was like horrified that we were giving women testosterone. Now, the International Society for Women's Sexual Health came out with a consensus statement saying, well, for postmenopausal women, they need testosterone. Well, hallelujah, you figured it out, but maybe I'm being unfair. It's always easier for us in the front lines to see what's actually needed than the people who are kind of in the back, sort of looking at, the data, the big picture. But it's no question in my mind that women who are younger also need testosterone. Again, you need to do this with the doctor. I am not giving you medical advice, but I will say that we think of testosterone as kind of the base coat paint. Like if you don't have the right estrogen and testosterone balance, it's going to be very hard for you to have a libido, want to have sex, be able to get turned on, arousal, have orgasms. It's going to be really hard. And if you start learning how to think about, and women are such smart diagnosticians, is what I've discovered. Like, I feel like women will know if there's something off physically, I think, the same way you knew something wasn't working right. Yeah. Again, I just went down this huge rabbit hole. You asked me a short question, and I just kept talking.
It's fascinating. And then the other thing I learned from your book is, for better or worse, I'm going to call it this idea that there is female Viagra options. Like I had no idea, and I'm not an unsophisticated consumer of knowledge. And yet, just fighting with my doctor to get sort of understand estrogen. The fact that you know all about that there are these medical drugs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just give us a little summary of the.
So I'm going to push back because I hate that Viagra equivalent. I know you're using it. I know. And I even say that, I think, in the book. I'm like, stop calling it Viagra. Because Viagra, we can give Viagra to women and we use Viagra on women. It does something very important for men, which is it helps the blood flow. And if that's a problem with women, we can use it on women also off label. But there's a couple of drugs out now. Addie, Vyleesi, they're not home runs. They're not, and I don't think I portrayed them that way in the book, but they can be helpful. One works in the brain to try to raise parts of the dopamine and the parts of the brain, the serotonin parts that are actually helpful for your desire. And one of them is an injection, which I hate to say because people are like, an injection? Are you kidding me? But it doesn't hurt. And you use it right before sexual activity, and it brings blood into the area. For sure brings blood into the area. And it can be helpful for arousal and for orgasm. So they are, and it's so interesting with this, Danielle, because I feel like the therapy community is very negative about the pharmaceutical companies putting time and money into finding alternative drugs to help women. And it's mind-boggling. Like they talk about it a little bit, and I'm a therapist, right? So I'm allowed to say this because I'm a therapist, but they talk about it as if like, oh, these drug companies are telling women that there's a problem and they're trying to make a buck off these women. But the reality is that if you give me more tools in my toolkit to help women, I don't care where it comes from. Big pharma, I'm fine with big pharma. If they're not going to do it because of their love of their, God and wife, they're going to do it because they're going to make money from it. And so the more drugs that we can have on the market that could be helpful, the better. And the truth is we do use some, like Wellbutrin is an old drug that's super helpful for orgasms. So there are medical options out there to help women. And I'm going to say this, to help women get points, right? Most of these medical options are not going to help if you just toss them at women, right? It's going to give them a certain number of points, but you need to like figure out how to use them. It's kind of like, if you send somebody for surgery, you want to make sure that they have the physical therapy afterwards, or the same thing is going to happen right again, right? So you can use these drugs, but these drugs are best used in combination with like behavioral approaches or changes in the scheduling of sex and those kinds of things.
And then the last sort of treatments, I've heard of these. But you did talk about them, and I was fascinated by them. They're using now laser therapies on women to one I'd heard of called the Mona Lisa touch, and then there's another. But explain to us what these laser things do.
Yeah, so it's so fascinating because nothing could be less sexy, I think, than a laser when you hear laser. But especially for women who have pain with their vagina, there's something wrong with the mucus or the mucosa in the vagina, or what we think of as the skin on the vagina, but this mucosa of the vagina. And what lasers can go in and do is sort of take the place of estrogen. So let's say you're a woman who's hitting menopause or a little before menopause, and your vagina is getting sort of thin and tissue papery, which happens because you lost your estrogen and you're not taking systemic estrogen for whatever reason, or it's not enough. And so the doctor will probably give you local estrogen, or estrogen that goes into your vagina, which really plumps up the tissue, gets back the blood in the area. Like it heals the tissue. It's different than lubricants, right? It's a healing product. Lasers can do that. So lasers go in and basically, simplifying it, they create some damage under the skin so that the skin then gets a signal to reproduce, and it brings in a newer, plumper, healthier version. If you're somebody who, like me, I couldn't stand the idea of using a cream every day. I would just hate that. I'm too disorganized. I just wouldn't do it. And that's messy. You can have a laser procedure done 3 times and you're good to go for a couple of years usually. So that's the Mona Lisa that you're talking about. We have some lasers we're using for other pain syndromes as well, because sometimes it's neurological, the pain, or sometimes it's, other areas of the skin that need to be addressed. And lasers are doing great jobs doing those things.
Yeah, it's incredible. I guess not the last question, but the all right, vibrators. You are known as the queen of vibrators. You love vibrators.
I do love vibrators. I do. I did my PhD. Yeah, go ahead.
And you did your PhD thesis on vibrators. What is so great about vibrators?
I love about vibrators is that they're so accessible, right? They don't change your body chemistry at all. They're not expensive. They're not in Cancun. They make the pleasure for women so much more intense, easy to access, dare I say quicker, especially for people with little kids. It's such an obvious. So the statistic is that 30% of women can have an orgasm from a penis and a vagina. That's 3 out of 10 women. Even though we have this mythology in our society that every woman should be able to do it, it's 3 out of 10 women. Somewhere between 7 and 8 women can have an orgasm from a hand or a mouth. So it's a much higher percentage. But 95% can have one with a vibrator. So why are we living in this crazy age where we have this gold standard of orgasm that has to happen from a hand, a mouth, or a penis? Like, just pull out the vibrator. It makes life so much easy, and it makes it so much fun and pleasant. And it just feels to me like the only reason it's not being adopted by almost every couple in this world is because there's still some crazy stigma to it. So that's why I'm just like, I feel frustrated that more people aren't using vibrators. I'm trying to introduce them to people in addition to my 82-year-old patient who loved her vibrator. So yeah, like I always say, vibrators are not kinky sex toys. Vibrators are your friend.
Yeah, honey, I've got this. Don't worry. It's all right.
Exactly.
You go to sleep. It's fine.
No, honey, let's pull out the vibrator. You can use it on me. You can watch me use it on myself. I can do it before we have intercourse. I can do it after we have intercourse. You can use it too. Just saying that.
All right. This is actually my last question, but just standing back, people listening to this, I'm sure there are people listening going, sex, who cares? Or why is it this important? Or I'm so glad I'm older. I don't have to think about it so much. Why is sex so important to our relationships? Good sex in particular.
So I think good sex is important to ourselves as human beings and to our relationships. And if somebody said to me, look, I'm really, truly happy about Sheva with no sex in my life, I would say more power to you. That is 100% legitimate. However, what I will say is that my experience is that most people feel like a part of them is not as alive as when they're really connected to their sexual beings. And that's both goes for an individual who just feels like maybe she's not walking around with that spring in her step and that sense of alive. That's the only way the pleasure of being alive just is connecting us to so many parts of ourselves. And our sexual part is a really, really important piece of that. And in terms of relationships, I think there's nothing else that cements a relationship and changes the tenor of a relationship than good sex. So, I have clients say to me things like, if I come home and his socks are on the floor and we had good sex recently, I'll laugh and I'll scoop them up and I'll dump them in the hamper. But if we come home and his socks are on the floor and we haven't had sex in a while, I just want to take those socks. I just want to stuff them down his mouth. That's like, that is sort of, there's something that changes the tenor of the relationship. And it makes sense to me because, our sexual beings are really at the core of who we are. They are like really sort of the essence of who we are. And when you're able to connect to somebody else and be with somebody else in a way that you're not with anybody else and show them and be naked with them. And I mean naked both metaphorically and practically, right? You're with them in a way that nobody else is. And you see them in a way that nobody else is. It just changes the tenor of the relationship in my experience. And those relationships are happier. So shutting down a fundamental, really central core piece of who you are just never feels like it's going to end well. And I think that is, I always tell people I didn't get into this field because I'm so excited about body part A and how it fits into body part B. Like that is not that exciting to me. But what happens in a relationship when people are feeling good about the sex is almost magical. So even though we have to change our overly romanticized views about sex, I think sex really does put an element of magic back into the relationship that really is almost non-duplicable any other way.
That's a wonderful summary. All right. The book is Sex Points, Reclaim Your Sex Life with the Revolutionary Multi-Point System. There's so much great wisdom in there and so much important information. So thank you, Dr. Marcus.
Sheva, yes.
Sheva. Thank you so much for coming on. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's face it, cooking at home day after day and trying to eat healthily is difficult at the best of times. But during a pandemic, getting everything you need to make meals is complicated right now. But with Freshly, it's simple. Freshly offers chef-made, nutrient-packed, delicious meals delivered fresh to your door. No cooking is required. Your meals arrive prepared and fresh every week, so you can keep your fridge stocked and skip the trip to the store. Ordering is easy. Visit freshly.com and choose from over 30 delicious, satisfying, better-for-you meals like steak peppercorn or sausage baked penne or their chicken pesto bowl. And Freshly can fit your lifestyle with a variety of plans and meals to pick from that work for your dietary needs, preferences, tastes, and family size. I've been dieting this past month, and I can tell you that not having to think about what I'm going to eat and opening my fridge and there's a meal and knowing it's healthy is fantastic. And now you can try Freshly for just $6.16 per meal. So stop searching the internet for quote unquote healthy foods near me every night and start living life freshly. Your meals are always delivered fresh, never frozen, and are ready to heat and enjoy in just 3 minutes. With new meals added each week, Freshly brings the convenience of chef-made, nutritionist-designed classics right to your kitchen. So right now, Freshly is offering our listeners $40 off your first 2 orders when you go to freshly.com/femsplain. Make eating better your New Year's resolution and get a special limited offer. Go to freshly.com/femsplain for $40 off your first 2 orders. So try Freshly now, and for a limited time, yes, get $40 off your first 2 orders. Go to freshly.com/femsplain to learn more and to start eating better. Okay, well, you can take your earbuds out or raise the volume. We're off the sex topic now. She's just fascinating, Dr. Sheva Marcus, and there's just so much more in the book. So I really urge you all to read it and give it to every woman you know. Now, joining me, I'm so excited about this. Joining me in the studio, I'm no longer entirely on my own, is our new intern. Her name is Kai, and I'm going to pronounce this beautifully. Watch. Her name is Kai Biliucci. Correct?
Oh, it's stunning. Fantastic pronunciation.
And I'll also have a cappuccino with my Biliucci.
Perfetto.
Welcome, Kai.
Thanks so much for having me as an intern and also for letting me come on. I'm excited.
Well, I'm sorry we're not actually in a physical studio together because when we last had a physical studio, we had a bar cart and we usually had cocktails for our guys. Well, I've fallen out of that habit. It's probably good and better for the podcast, but I'm sorry I can't offer you a drink.
Definitely missed out, but that's okay. I'll have one later here in my studio at home. So,
what is your favorite cocktail? This is an important question we need to know.
My favorite cocktail is a Negroni.
I was going to say, I bet it's a Negroni with your Italian.
Sure is.
Fantastic. So you are a journalism student. So just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us why on earth you would want to work for us.
Yeah. So I study at J School at CUNY, which is in New York, little public school. And I came to journalism kind of on accident. I landed a journalism internship after studying philosophy as an undergraduate. And I just really fell in love with it. I came to Femsplainers because I studied philosophy, but specifically philosophy of gender and race, and social ontology, if anyone knows what that means. And so it was just a great fit to kind of see, wow, this is a podcast about women, for women mostly. I mean, for everybody, but really great audience, and just love talking about politics and policy through women's lens, women's issues. The fact that we had an episode on boobs, fantastic.
So Kai, so you're going to read to us this week's, you're going to read to us this month's listener reaction, which we had a lot. And go ahead, roll it out.
Yeah, so we had a lot of reaction to the Katie Herzog episode, which is fantastic. From Taylor Lombardo on Facebook, short and sweet. She said, so happy Christina was back for this episode.
That was Christina Summers, our beloved femsplainer, co-splainer. Yep.
And she said, it's an incredibly interesting topic. As a conservative, I've listened to the Femsplainers podcast now for several years, and I've always appreciated how objective and open-minded you all are, and how you've risen above the tendency on both sides of the political aisle to automatically bash members of the other side just because they disagree. I'm always impressed with how you all uphold the right to having a free and open discussion.
Okay, well, thank you, Taylor. It's nice to hear.
And so then the next one I got is Seth via email. So Seth says he's a big fan of your show and was delighted to see and then hear that another of his favorite podcasters, Katie Herzog, was joining you this week. He said, I enjoyed the episode very much. Your segments on female identity in relation to trans issues, misogyny, and the attempted erasure of femininity in Western culture inspired me to write today with a suggestion, if I may be so bold, he says, for your research intern hiring process. He said, hire a humanities major. And we did.
We did. Although I have to warn you, there was probably more money to be made in philosophy. I think even the tips at Starbucks would have been better than working for a podcast. But sorry, go on. Sorry to interrupt you, Seth.
So you said, I wonder if having someone on your staff who is steeped in the arts and literature would add even more texture to your conversations and research. For example, in that week's show, he loved the Plato reference, and Katie brought up Judith Butler and other important thinkers on gender. But what about great lesbian artists and authors? You mentioned gay men as playwrights and classical music composers, and then contrasted them with a dismissive quote about lesbians as softball players. But what about Virginia Woolf, Gertrude Stein, Carson McCullers, Paula Vogel, Alison Bennell? I love these authors, women very much concerned with, among other things, femininity and female spaces. Seth said he's a writer of fiction, screenplays, and plays. He teaches at a prestigious university in the Midwest. He said, I sometimes teach a class about adapting fiction to the stage. And whenever we look at Virginia Woolf, her work is almost impossible to translate to other media like film or stage, but that's the point of the exercise. He said his students fall in love with her highly feminine, contained, and interior but exhilarating worlds. In a conversation about stereotypes of lesbians, it would be great to hold a candle for some of the great artists. So many of them were and are trying to hold fast to the notion of women's spaces, and that feels so important right now. Thanks for all your femsplain.
Thank you, Seth. But yes, that was actually a joke. I think it was Christina told where the punchline was about softball. But yeah, no. So Kai, you've got your marching orders now. You've got to make us more high-minded, introduce us to more female writers, especially lesbians. So, go for it. That's Kai's promise to do that for us, Seth.
I'll work on that, Seth. So then we've got Roy coming in. Roy says he's a longtime listener. He said, I've been listening to the latest episode of the Femsplainers. The interview with Katie Herzog was excellent as usual. It mentioned how Katie found herself being canceled by her peers and how this seemed to hint what some like-minded people harder. As I say this in the book I'm writing, I would like to give this some background. Everybody knows about the fight or flight response when our brain's most primitive parts encounter a stressful situation. But Dr. Laura Casino-Klein discovered that many test subjects are male in older research on this topic. Klein argued that fighting or fleeing weren't the best approaches for prehistoric women. Rather, they needed to take care of the children she was responsible for and seek safety in the company of allies. In short, the female equivalent of the male's fight or flight response is tend and befriend. Sounds lovely, he says. Tend and befriend. But keep in mind that this is a stress response. So this is not a cozy get together and sing kumbaya. Rather, it's a harsh, xenophobic us versus them mindset. But instead of a small group of straight white men, the xenophobic inner group is now a small group of like-minded, non-binary people. Unfortunately, I see this a lot in modern wokeism because it is the female equivalent of male aggression. Roy says, there's an easy solution to this. As most contemporary men are learning not to give in to their impulses to fight, we realize that there is no real reason to be stressed out. So there is no reason to become aggressive. We can no longer be cavemen. Likewise, women also left the prehistory behind. Tending children is no longer the main responsibility for women, and making friends is a great idea as long as it's based upon inclusion, not exclusion. I wish more women would let go of their in the company of allies and instead realize that there is no them to be afraid of. This is what I like about the ideology the Femsplainers represents. It's far more inclusive than many of the others who discuss gender issues. With kind regards, Roy.
Thank you, Roy. Although what I would like to stress is that we don't have an ideology. We try and stay well away from isms, and we like exploring ideologies, but we not are one. But I appreciate that, Roy, and I would love to hear more about the book you're writing. I see, Kai, the next reaction is from Mary Grace. She's an interesting young woman. I got into a kind of pen pal correspondence with her. We were debating something going back and forth. She actually wrote us a letter saying that she was no longer going to listen to the femsplainers because she felt we were too partisan, and that she had supported Trump, and that she thought that anytime we'd gone near the topic that we were dismissive of Trump supporters. And she wanted to say that she was a woman, educated in the sciences. She works for a large hospital, and she supported Trump, but she did come to regret it, I think, especially after the insurrection. But I got into a discussion with her about how, first of all, we weren't dismissive of his supporters, but that you can be critical of someone like Trump but his supporters always took this as a direct criticism of them. So anyway, we got into this long, but I think rather interesting and almost philosophical back and forth. And then she told me that she's a young woman and she's married. She got married young. And I said she was extremely clever for doing that. And I sent her my book, What Our Mothers Didn't Tell Us. And so she replied with this note.
She says, "Hey, Danielle, thank you so much for the book. I've loved it so far. I'm about halfway through it. It seems to even foreshadow a lot of the things that have happened since it was written: the Me Too movement, declining birth rates in the first world countries, and the continued confusion among feminists of what they're fighting for. It so far has definitely affirmed the choice I made to marry my best friend at 24. Many of my college friends went to different cities and their significant others post-college, and they all ended up miserable. As such, doing whatever it takes to move to the same city as your significant other has been frequent, unsolicited advice of mine to all of my younger friends as they're job searching. Take a pay cut. Be flexible in industry. You'll make each other happier than any job will. Even if you break up, you'll at least be less lonely in a new city. This will definitely be a book I recommend."
It's great, Mary Grace. Thank you. I think what she's saying in that, although I don't talk about moving to cities, but prioritizing your relationship is something you should do over your work and anything else, because in the end, it is the most important relationship of your life, more important than anything else you'll do. And that's even, should you go on to have career, children, everything will depend on that relationship. So I'm glad she took that message. It was really fun debating with you, Mary Grace, and I'm glad we didn't lose you as a listener.
I feel the same too. I mean, I'm 24 and I will be marrying my best friend for similar reasons. So very exciting, Mary Grace. Congrats to you. Our next note is Alan.
Kai, you have referred to your fiance, and I haven't wanted to pry, which is completely against my nature. But that's fantastic. Congratulations. How long have you known each other?
We've been together for a little over 2 years, and we met in college. So it's a similar situation. He's wonderful. His name is Diego, and he's originally from Brazil. But yeah, we live together in our little studio with my cat. So very exciting stuff.
Oh, and he puts up with cats. Well, he
loves a good cat. He's allergic too, and he still loves them. So,
okay, well then that's true. That's true love, Kai. All right. I see this last name is from Alan. This is okay. Our listeners of the past few shows will recognize Alan. Actually, I think this is what caused Mary Grace to write us. Alan wrote to us saying he was having marital problems because he was a Trump supporter, is a Trump supporter, and his wife adamantly isn't and wasn't. She is a self-described person of color, and he just basically reached out to us and said, "Help! What do we do?" And we had Irshad Manji, who is one of our occasional co-splainers on, and she's absolutely great at mediating difficult conversations. So we talked him through it. He went back and he wrote to us subsequently to say that things were a lot better, especially since Trump lost. And then, although he was down, his wife was definitely happier. And then he's reached out to us, it looks like, with another update. We want to read that.
Yeah. So Alan said, on another note, Just wanted to give you a quick update about things with my wife. Your prediction that if Trump lost, it reduced the tensions in my marriage were spot on. Things have really calmed down between us, though it's still better that we avoid the subject of politics anyway, just to avoid all the hot button social and cultural issues. Interestingly, my wife said she can't stand Biden and disagrees with almost all his policies and executive orders, but would still prefer him to a, quote, racist rapist, her words, who advocates saner policies. Interesting place to be. I've pretty much stopped following the day-by-day news so as to avoid the anguish and upset which would accompany me watching the country get destroyed in slow motion. There's nothing I can do to stop it, so why bother?
Well, I'm so thrilled that they have found harmonies through mutual hate or dislike. They can both sit on the couch and dislike Biden together. So I think, Alan, it sounds like your marriage is saved. Anyway, well, that's great. We love hearing from our listeners. And so never hesitate to reach out to us at contact@femsplainers.com or through our social media. And Kai, such a thrill to have you aboard. Don't hesitate to reach out to Kai and ask her questions too.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to some maybe from anyone who wants to talk about humanities majors.
Right. Or Roy, name some more famous lesbian writers, I think. Anyway, well, thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Femsplainers is a weekly podcast carried on the Ricochet Network and available pretty much on every podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and watch video of our interviews on YouTube. You'll find links to everything, plus how to contact us directly at femsplainers.com. We survive and depend on your support. Like the show? Consider donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/femsplainers. And get our exclusive monthly bonus episode, Last Call, in which you get to join the conversation with our guests. And there's much more. And a big shout out of thanks to our audio and video editor, Nat Frum.